When I was a young girl, I spent many vacations with my maternal grandparents on their farm. My granny would take me along to the chicken coop to gather the eggs each day. We would walk across the field to the chicken coop. The sun would be low in the sky and our shadows would be long. I loved playing with my shadow, moving my arms and legs in funny ways to see how my shadow looked when I did it. Granny wore a big sun bonnet every time she went outdoors. I always wanted a sun bonnet like hers, but hers were too big for me and flapped in my face. Once, Granny sent me to get some eggs from the hen that kept trying to set on her eggs to hatch them. Granny didn't want her to hatch babies out. She had plenty of chickens, but she sold her eggs to the grocery store in town. This particular day she was baking and had run out of eggs. This chicken was sitting in an old barrel turned on its side. There were yucca bushes around the barrel, so I had to be careful not to get poked. I was scared of that chicken, because it hurt when they pecked me. But I had watched my granny slowly and gently reach under a chicken to take her eggs many times before. So I crawled through the yucca bushes to the barrel, and then inched my way in until I could reach the chicken. Slowly I reached my hand out, and just as I was about to slip it under the chicken, she pecked the tar out of me. It scared me more than it hurt, but I scrambled out from under those daggers and ran hollering back to the house. Granny fussed over me and said what a mean chicken she was, and that we would have chicken and dumplings for supper the next day. And we did. Looking back, I'm pretty sure it wasn't the chicken that pecked me that ended up in the pot, but it tickled me to think so. Granny baked bread every few days. She would get out her big crockery bowl and mix up the dough. She used a thin knife that had been sharpened so many times it was just a sliver of metal to scrape the dough off the sides of the bowl, and I would get a tiny pinch of dough to eat. I loved that bread dough about as much as I loved the freshly baked bread, and I would always beg her for more. And she would always tell me the story of the bear. Once there was a hungry bear walking through the forest. He came upon a little cabin and smelled something delicious. There, in the window, were 2 bread pans, with dough rising in them. The bear swiped both pans of bread dough and went off into the woods to eat it. He ate both pans. He was a very hungry bear. Soon, he was mighty thirsty, so he went down to the creek and got himself a big old drink of water. Once his thirst was satisfied, he found a nice place to take a nap in the sunshine. Well, while the old bear slept in the sunshine, the dough in his belly began to swell up from the heat of the sun. That dough grew and grew and grew until the bear's belly was huge. He couldn't even stand up. Finally, he stood up, but stumbled and fell and rolled down the hill like a big bear ball, and he rolled up against a tree and then, pop. That old bear's big belly popped like a balloon and he fell over and died. That story would always make me stop begging for raw bread dough. Granny had plenty of stories to tell us, but the dough-thieving bear is the one I remember best. My granny was the absolute sweetest woman on earth. She adored me and my brothers, and she let us know it. Once she sewed me a flat bunny out of flour sack material. She worked on it a little bit each day. Soon, the bunny took shape and she stuffed him with old clean stockings. She embroidered his eyes, nose, and little bunny mouth. Then she cut out a shirt and shorts for the bunny to have some clothes. She was almost done with it, just needed to sew the buttons on the shirt, and I was super excited about my new flat bunny rabbit. Our stay was over, and it came time to leave. My dad loaded up the car and told us kids to hug our grandparents goodbye. But my bunny's clothes weren't finished yet. I was frantic. Granny quickly threaded a needle and started sewing the buttons on the little shirt. By that time my dad and mom and brothers were in the car, and my dad was blowing the horn and hollering for me to come on before he left without me. Granny's hands moved like lightning as she sewed 3 black buttons onto my bunny's shirt. I started to cry because I was afraid I would be left behind, and my granny softly told me not to cry and promised me I wouldn't be left. "Your daddy would never go off without you," she said, and I stopped crying as she handed me my dressed bunny and squeezed me tight one more time and told me she loved me, and then smacked my bottom and told me to run. I did too, and my dad grumbled a little bit about me taking so long. But he loved my granny at least as much as I did, his mother-in-law, and so he looked at my bunny and smiled and said what he always said when we were loaded up and leaving. And we're off like a herd of hurdles. And we drove down the gravel road and through the gate, headed back home. I looked back to see Granny standing on the front porch with Grandpa, both of them waving and waving until they were out of my sight. I still have my flat bunny.